Hello, wonderful people. So today we're going to be talking about side angle side congruence. We know what congruent means, and we're going to be applying that to side angle side. So let's read the definition. If two corresponding sides are congruent and the angle in between are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. Okay, so what is that definition actually saying? Well, here are two triangles. We have triangle ABC and triangle A prime, B prime, C prime. Now this is saying that if two corresponding sides are congruent, let's see that. So side AB is corresponding to side A prime, B prime, right? Corresponding means that they are in the same position. Okay, so these dashes here indicate that those two sides are congruent in fact. We also know that side AC is corresponding to side A prime, C prime. And those two are congruent as well. Lastly, we're also given that the measure of angle A is congruent to the measure of angle A prime. Okay, so now we have a side that's congruent, an angle that's congruent, and another side that's congruent. Now, what can we say about the two triangles based on these givens? I can say that the two triangles are congruent. The two triangles are congruent. So here's my formal statement, my formal congruent statement. They are congruent. Why are they congruent? Well, they're congruent because of side angle side. But our definition of congruence said that two triangles are congruent if there exists a sequence of rigid motions that map one shape to the other. So we need to show that there is indeed a rigid motion that takes triangle ABC to triangle A prime, B prime, C prime. So let's find a sequence. So first, our first sequence of rigid motion is, well, I can translate over to A prime by vector A prime, correct? Now, I'm not there yet, but the next thing I can do is I can rotate until I map AC to A prime, C prime. And finally, I think you can see how I can map B to B prime. All I need to do is a reflection, and I've mapped them. Now I can see that triangle ABC lies perfectly on top of triangle A prime, B prime, C prime. Therefore, the two triangles must be congruent. So now any time that you see this idea where you have two pairs of corresponding sides being congruent and the angle in between those two sides are also congruent, well then the two triangles must be congruent. That means that angle B is congruent to angle B prime, angle C is congruent to angle C prime, and side BC is congruent to side C prime, B prime. Okay, so let's look at an example. So here we are given that the measure of angle LNM is equal to the measure of angle LNO, and we're given that MN is equal to ON. All right? So we have to show, right, that triangle LNM and triangle LNO are congruent by side angle side. Okay? So the question says, do the two triangles meet the side angle side criteria? Every time you see this, what that means is that we need to prove that the two triangles are congruent by side angle side. So we make our T-chart with statements on one side and the reasoning on the other side. So the first step, we always know what our first line is, right? It's always the given. So in this case, we have two different givens. So we'll write those two things down. The measure of angle LNM is equal to the measure of angle LNO. And we know that that's given, right? That's just the reasoning for that. We're accepting that to be true. And the second piece of information is that MN is equal to ON. And again, the same reasoning here, right? It's also given. Now this is the piece where we got to use what we know and try to figure out where are we headed. What is our goal? What should our last line say? Remember, we're trying to prove that the two triangles are congruent based on side angle side. So right now, we have that an angle is congruent, right? We have the measures of angles are congruent, and we have the measure of one side to be congruent. But remember, the angle needs to be in between the sides. So far we have a side, and we have an angle being congruent. So what side do we need to say now is congruent, right? So we have a side and angle. What is the side that we need to show that are congruent? Right? We can say, right, don't both of these triangles share this same side? Don't they share it, so they must be equal, right? So so LN is equal to, guess what? Yes, it is equal to LN. And why is that true? Well, that is true by the reflexive property. And we spoke about the reflexive property before. It's true because of the reflexive property. Are we done? Can I now say that the two triangles are congruent by side angle side? Well, let's see. I have a side that's congruent here. I have an angle that's congruent to the other angle, and I have a side that's congruent to itself. So, yes, I can say that triangle, finally, triangle LNM is congruent. Don't forget that's the symbol for congruent to triangle LNO. And that is true by side angle side.